This is a small video of my work table. I'm afraid it is very, very untidy and muddly, but I absolutely love it. And Chips, my dog, is barking in the background. I think a deer must have come into the garden. And the boiler is purring away below. It's a very comforting sound, and I know in the winter that when that boiler comes on, I'm gorgeously warm. The title of my project is The Collector's Room. I have collected things since a small child, and it has become part of my practice, as well as a way of drawing my surroundings. Many of these objects have been found when walking, and so walking has become an important part of who I am. I am very interested in the way people engage with art, and in this project I would like to slow the audience down and make them look closely, and even more closely, and engage with the ideas that are projected in this work. For the first time ever, I am curating the collection and arranging the objects in groups, together with found text and found images. Materiality plays a large part in my work, and I make ordinary things and display them beside found objects. It focuses on the moments when materials become willful participants within that artistic process.
Well, it all started with a bonfire. I found some old pictures in my studio and I realised that I really didn't like working that way anymore. And so I started a small fire and burnt quite a few canvases. It wasn't easy, and during that day I felt quite bad about doing it. But the day after I felt quite good about it, and it sort of relates back to a self-portrait project we did earlier on in the year, and this had a psychogeographical element to it as well, and that really means that you put yourself into situations and environments where you might feel slightly uncomfortable. So I took this idea of feeling uncomfortable and how I could sort of examine my own self, if you like, by doing that. So I decided, having done the bonfire, that I would put myself into other situations where I felt quite slightly uncomfortable or slightly different to how I go along normally. And I've tried various different things. I've been singing under bridges, I've been wandering around taking photos and babbling into my phone recorder. I've been walking in circles with wet feet. I've done all sorts of strange things and come back to the conclusion that for me it's all about observing how I'm coping with change at the moment.
Well, I used a blue plastic bottle that I bought in the plane when we were going on our trip to Madrid. And what I had in my mind was the final project that we had been given, which was, roughly speaking, around self-portrait. And as the plane descends, the bottle, when you've drunk most of the water, the bottle, the pressure forces it to change its shape. So I picked the bottle up to leave and I looked at the shape and I thought this is an interesting shape, and then it occurred to me that it's also a kind of metaphor for the way that the forces in our environment act upon us and, in a sense, make us change our shape, whether that's a physical shape or psychic or emotional or systemic or whatever shape. We're affected by what's going on around us. So the metaphor kind of gained strength for me, and then I started learning how to make moulds and cast using initially wax and porcelain slip, resin, and making a mould I found incredibly much more difficult than I imagined. I had to have 3 goes at it before I got the separation line remotely right, because the shape of the bottle is rather complex. It had lots of overhangs, and that in itself was a lesson in humility and patience. A use of quite a lot of materials, and then I just got involved with making different forms of the bottle, using now wrapping stuff around it, or making covering it with papier, thin layers of papier-mâché, and then
Yeah, so my project is, I suppose in many ways it feels like a culmination of several things I've been exploring over the past year. It was, which is because it's combines 2D, 3D and moving image, which is quite unlike my previous work that I did before. So it's quite interesting, and I think it's particularly because I'm quite interested in this, I suppose, in exploring the idea of what an image is and what an image can be, by using things that are overlapping with other things. So yeah, that's something which I was quite interested in exploring in this project. And in terms of sort of the themes, I suppose, that I was interested in exploring, is more this idea of, I suppose, bringing something private into the public sphere, as it were. So, say, like a body, which is usually something which is quite self-contained, quite private, but using scale to make that something which becomes a very public thing, something very conspicuous. And I think scale has been sort of also a key element of this project, because I've been working initially from very small, well, quite small models, sculpting sort of probably about 15 centimetre high, something like that, models, and then working up to a very large, quite a large scale from those models. So that's been also an interesting thing to explore, sort of the difference in effect, and also that sense of being further removed from the original source. So I've been drawing from something that I've sculpted, which is also something new for me.
My work for this show is based on the feeling of going from a state of restriction into a state of freedom. My mother died 3 months ago, and before that I had been looking after her for over 10 years. But I do know that it's quite a universal thing to be in a restricted state, and I wanted to somehow describe the change that occurs. My work is process driven. Really love to be in a sort of between state of control and out of control, order and chaos. And I suppose you could almost say I'm doing that within this performance, with this restriction and then freedom, sort of two opposites coming together, and what happens in that in-between stage. I'm doing a performance because I feel that it is the best way to describe exactly this change that occurs. I was so tied to my mother's needs for so many years. It does feel a very bittersweet feeling to not be looking after her, and yet we all go through these kind of stages in our life, and it is a part of life. My practice is very much process driven. Similar to this performance piece, there's an incredible process that goes on in order to put the work together.
I'm doing something about what it's like to die, death from the point of view of the dying person. A source of information to do with this is accounts of near-death experiences and analysis of those accounts, which is what I've been using. And I'm interested in the subjective experience of the dying. The near-death experiences suggest that people go through stages, feeling harmony, feeling joy, feeling at peace, a kind of seeing the light and then becoming the light, as being 5 stages. And I'm trying to kind of represent that process, becoming the light. I'm producing a metaphor, as I see it, for this process. And I'm using the Platonic solids from Greek geometry. The Platonic solids are the cube, the icosahedron, the octahedron, the tetrahedron, and the dodecahedron. And I'm using their association in Greek thought with the elements that the Greeks identified as earth, water, air, fire, and quintessence, and I'm putting those alongside these 5 stages.
So my work's about identity, and I guess in retrospect, looking back this year, most of my work has been kind of unpicking parts of my identity and who I'm trying to figure out who I am. I've been in the UK for 2 years now, but I've decided to go back. So that's where I'm at in my work now, and I think instead of thinking of a concept that's maybe, that I like, or it's a bit looser, I want to try and look at something that I'm experiencing now. So what is my reality now? How could I create something or work with something which I'm experiencing now? Earlier this year I wrote a manifesto which kind of solidified where I'm at as an artist, and it really helped me go, yes, using emotion and layers of meaning is really what I like to do as an artist, and that's okay. So this work is really looking at myself now, and I really like who I am now, but can I take that back to Australia in a place where I've been before? So the work is an installation. It's taking pieces of houses, it's taking pieces of furniture, scrap materials, and that's kind of stemmed from living in 12 different houses, which in my process I've kind of depicted and drawn, and living in all these different houses has made me realise how much I like being in a space and making that work. So in this work you'll see mirrors, you'll see glass, you'll see windows, you'll see kind of me trying to explore that inner versus outer, and yes, I can be in a space but also feel like I'm outside and things like that. So that's what I'm trying to do.
I like working in different media, and usually a project begins with an idea and then the choice of medium comes a bit later. But for this project I decided I would start with the medium, and I chose photography. And having chosen it, I needed a subject, and so I looked around and chose road markings. And I chose them because they are one of the most, or one of the least aesthetic things you can think of, probably. We don't certainly think of them as beautiful, and we don't really notice them very much, and they still kind of control what we can do and how we behave in some ways. So I gathered a lot of photographs, and I started working on them in Photoshop. I'm not a painter, so the nearest thing I get probably to painting is using Photoshop. And the objects themselves, the road markings, are literally paintings. When you think of it, they are a paint applied to a surface. So what I'm doing is reworking those paintings. And I began by making them black and white, adjusting the tonal range so they were a bit more dramatic, have a bit more impact, and then worked on top of them with Photoshop in the colours. So what I've eventually done is to take the road painter's original work and rework it, but my reworking is not on the road, it's just on the image.